My whole life, I've known that I was special. Even as a child, I was the apple of my parents' eye. They showered me with attention, affection, and always made me feel like I was precious.
I grew up in a very abusive home. My dad physically beat my mother to basically unconsciousness. In turn, she would beat me. I've been sexually abused.
Her third husband began molesting me at the age of 6 years old, and that continued on until I was 9.
I was sexually abused by an uncle from the age of 6 until I was 12, and when it came to light, I was blamed for it. So I grew up thinking that something was wrong with me. I have gone through my life looking for approval through sex, relationships, and people-pleasing.
From the time I was, 14 to 18, I'd had at least 2 abortions. I got married and I had my son, and we continued to do IV cocaine and crack.
At the age of 13, I was introduced to drugs and alcohol, and I began using. I used every day, and just when I'd start coming down from being high, I'd use more drugs so I wouldn't have to feel anymore.
I didn't fit in nowhere. I felt just like I was an alien here. I didn't like what I was doing, but I didn't know how to stop. I had to drug from sunup to sundown, day after day after day after day, because I didn't want to deal with reality. I didn't know how to deal with it.
I was on a photo shoot in Florida, and the photographer introduced me to a couple who stripped in one of the clubs.
And a month before I turned 18 years old, I began to dance in the topless clubs to take care of my mother and my sister and my brother.
I started selling my body as a means of money, and with that came the rapes and the beatings, and turn around and go right back out and do the same thing all over again.
I always knew I'd make it. I don't know how I knew, I just did. I always knew that someday someone would see who I really was, what I was really worth, and then, once they did, I knew they'd give everything to help me.
We were brought up kind of like maybe movie stars. We had our own hairdressers, our own makeup people. I've had cars, I had furs, I've had diamonds, I've had homes, I've had it all.
I always knew he'd find me. And he did.
If I say, for instance, I'm at the drive-up at Sonic, if some young lady caught my eye, I would probably give her one of my cards and say, won't you come see me sometimes? I know you ain't making no money here. The next time I come, whether it's a week later, whether it's a month later, I may buy a $5 meal. I may tip her $20. That right there is gonna get her attention, because she's gonna say thank you. And that's all I need is a door. She says thank you. I was like, well, hey, no thanks needed. You could be making this money yourself. If I can get them in the club, over half of the battle was won right there.
I just always knew that someday all the spotlights, they'd be for me.
I can go in there and I can do this a couple of times, and then I'll have enough money to just leave it alone. And I went in there and I made $500 my first night. And I was like, ooh, I really like this. And then my second week, it was like $1,700, and like anywhere in that price range was my amount. And the money totally sucked me in. I got up on that stage one time and it was over. It was over. I liked the attention. I like to be able to drink and use my drugs and do whatever I wanted to do whenever I was at work. I could make my own schedule. I could quit when I wanted to, go back when I wanted to, make as much money as I wanted to.
And I'd look out and I'd see all these fans who love me, really, really love me, fans that just can't get enough of me. And I'd love them back, all of them. I always knew my name would be up in lights, and everybody would want my picture and my autograph. That someday, people would want to know exactly what I was thinking, but they'd hang on to my every word.
Well, he started out all sweet, and he gave me whatever I wanted and was taking care of me and my daughter and cared to hear how my day was. And he was there the day I got out of prison. And, you know, it was just like, oh, he's perfect. It was the normal. It was just me and him, and we were having fun. And then that night, he was like, I gotta go pick this girl up and take her up to the club. And I was like, okay. So we go and we pick this girl up. And while we're sitting in the motel room, she's like, oh yeah, me and him have been sleeping together for such and such amount of time. And I'm like, what? You and him have been what? And she was like, oh, I know it's all about the money and that you're his number one girl and blah, blah, blah. He went from boyfriend to pimp right then. He said, you know, I am $50,000 in debt with the drug mafia, and I really need to go borrow this money from these Indians, and I need you to help me out with this. So I went, and me and another girl, and we catered to 6 Indians for $50,000. I hated that a whole lot worse than I did stripping. A whole lot worse. But I wouldn't dare tell him that. Every time I tried to tell him that, I got beat. He didn't want to hear that.
You better get out there and do something. I do not have time. I do not have money. Get your worthless tail out there and do something now! Now!
Like I said, I always knew I'd make it.
My drug habit was never less than 1,000 a day.
I was out there, like, I had a 3-month-old daughter and I weighed 90 pounds.
I was even willing to stay in relationships where I was beaten just constantly. This person has to love me, so, you know, if he didn't, he wouldn't be taking time out to beat me. You know, that's where my thinking was. I was more of a desperate crack addict. I got caught up in the neighborhood, turning tricks, in empty houses, you know, living under a bridge. That's the way my life was. I was badly raped and beaten January 3rd, 2003. Getting in a car with a stranger, and this guy took me home where he beat me with a water hose and force-fed me decon rat poison. It put me in the hospital unconscious for 3 days.
I've literally got scars on my arms from being a junkie. And I have hepatitis C from using my own dirty syringes from the dried blood. I have a chronic liver condition. I'm on a form of chemo now. So I'm definitely paying the consequences for my heavy drug use.
I didn't hit rock bottom until I began turning trick, sober. I didn't hit rock bottom until I was turning trick for free. I hit rock bottom when my self-worth went from as bad as I thought it could get, which was dancing, to even worse. I became someone's slave.
But the whole time, I never dreamed that I would get out of the industry. I really thought that that's what I was doomed to do the rest of my life.
I always knew that someday someone would see who I really was, what I was really worth. And then, once they did, I knew they'd give everything to help me.
This particular young woman came in. She was very shut down. She'd been terribly abused. And she didn't trust. There was absolutely, you could tell she had very little trust in her life. But I remember looking over at her hands, and she had scars in her hands. And I said, "Oh, what is that?" And she proceeded to tell me that one of the club owners had a particular thing that he did, like he had certain women that he would send out with certain clients, and if you didn't want to go, then he had a bowl of punishments that they had to draw from. And her punishment was that he took a nail gun and shot her hands with it. And when she said that, I just started crying. And I took her little hands and I looked at her and I said, honey, I said, do you know who has nail scars on his hand for you and for me, and that he loves you so much? And it just broke my heart, and it won my heart.
She's only one, and there's many out there, and that's just a tip of the iceberg to what they're subjected to.
God loves them and that He is there to forgive, and they've got to learn to forgive themselves. And I felt like that's something that I could bring to them, that they are forgiven, and what they've done has been forgotten, and that you get on with your life.
And they're not worthless. That's what I would like most of all for people to know, that they have as much value as any other person that God ever created, and to see Him pour His love into them and to make the types of changes that come about in their lives is almost like a miracle.
It's not about what you've done in your past. Let's see what we can do to brighten your future. Let's see what we can do to better your life. They don't dwell on the bad things that I've done. They just look forward to the things that I can be and the things that I can do.
I'm so involved in these women's lives and want to know what's going on, so I can pray for them, so I can support them, encourage them in any way that I can. They're looking for a way out, and I'm trying to help them find it.
A 1 o'clock class, and then after the 1 o'clock class, I got like.
You're the star of this one. No, I'm
My
not.
mentor, Linda, she's a great friend, and today I know what a friend is, and the way our program helps me with my issues.
Each one is so special and so, God's so blasted and broken that as you hear these stories, it's not the stories so much, it's just the sadness in your heart for these women. Because when you mentor, you really, really get to know them like almost like a family member, or like a really close friend, or like a daughter sometimes. I guess that's what mentoring is.
That's okay. Natural, like I just did. No.
Our goal is to show the girls who Christ is. That's every mentor's goal. We're not judging them. We want to show them the love of Christ. And I think that, gosh, there are very few that don't end up accepting that for themselves, that they really, between the Bible studies and watching the mentors be like Christ to them in terms of giving them unconditional love, they soften and they want that.
You almost see a light turn on when those tears well up in their eyes and they realize that they really are loved, and sometimes it's for the very first time. I feel like the Lord's in the room with us. I know He's there, but I feel His presence stronger than I ever do.
Each one of them is a miracle. When you look at their life and what they've been through, most of them probably shouldn't even be there. Just the odds are that somebody would have beaten them to death. We see that as they walk in the door. And that's the neatest thing. One way I see God work, and this is the way He works in me through this, really. But when that woman walks in that door, I honestly don't see what she's done. I see what she can be. And I know that's Christ.